Hello, this is Matt Janucki, and you're listening to Inside Men's Mental Health, brought to you by Psych Sessions. Here we explore this thing called masculinity and its impact on men's mental health, relationships, and communities. We'll learn together through conversations with thought leaders, innovators, and industry experts. Our conversations will also help us understand how these experts became interested in men's mental health and the ways their journeys have made them who they are today. In this episode, I talk with my friend and colleague Tyler Whitmer, Assistant Athletic Director of Olympic Sports Performance at Boise State University. Tyler has been immersed in athletics since he was a young athlete, and now he spends his time investing in the development of young college athletes. I was really interested to learn more about Tyler's perspectives on the young men that he regularly works with, including how athletics culture can both help and harm men. We also had a chance to dive deeper into a turning point in his career when he decided he didn't want to just help these young athletes become faster and stronger, but also help them become better men. Thanks, and enjoy. Well, welcome to Inside Men's Mental Health. Today I'm talking with my friend and colleague Tyler Whitmer. Tyler is Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Performance, Health and Wellness for Olympic Sports Performance here at Boise State University. Tyler, glad to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate the invite and our chance to connect some more, and looking forward to it.
Now you can't see this, but Tyler and I are in an office here trying to record this, and we have a rogue wasp that's hopefully not going to attack us here. And so, if something crazy happens, you hear running around, this is because there's a wasp that's tried to.
Yeah,
to get
it
us.
looks like it might be taking a nap, so we might be all right.
Okay. So just curious about your background a little bit, Tyler. So I've noted you worked at a lot of different places before you came to Boise State. How long have you been at Boise State?
I've been here now this is my seventh year.
Seventh season. You've been at places like smaller private institutions, like you've been at Oral Roberts. You've been at University of Denver, one of the institutions that I'm familiar with. Colorado State, big University of Kansas. So you've kind of been a lot of different places. Just curious, how you got started in athletics, how you got the passion to become a coach. Take me through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, and like most young kids, I played a lot of different sports in grade school and middle school and then high school. The sport I was probably the best at was football. And my high school teammate, oddly enough, his dad was the head strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos.
Okay.
And, as I was getting into football, you obviously know that athletic performance and strength training and speed development, those are important. I didn't really always love doing that. I was much more concerned with extracurricular activities.
The strength conditioning piece?
Yeah, I didn't always love going into the weight room.
Okay.
I mean, I just felt like it was something I had to do to be able to play football. And then slowly as I matured and I saw the benefits it provided, because I wasn't all that great and it made me a little bit better, I started to buy into it a little bit more. But where I got lucky was this teammate, his dad invited some of us over a course of a spring and summer to train at the Denver Broncos facility.
Oh, wow.
And that was awesome.
Sure.
I mean, to see first, okay, this is his job, that he gets to work with these types of athletes was incredibly special. And then to see some of the players that I would watch on TV come into the facility, You're like, wow, this is cool.
And you're in high school.
I was in high school at that point. And so then go to college and try to do the walk-on thing for football. And it just, wasn't really in the cards for me to continue my career. So tried to start figuring out, okay, what do I want to do? And at the time, it was like, well, I'm just going to go business. My dad was a CPA by trade. And I said, well, that seems like the sensible thing to do. And then I got a D in microeconomics my first semester. And that really made my mom angry because now my car insurance was at jeopardy because I dropped below a 3.0.
Okay. So
I needed to get serious about hey, what are you going to do? So then I decided to take a kinesiology course and thrived. That's where kind of my mind gravitated towards more of the physical sciences and how the body works. And during that time, I was really starting to invest my time in my own training and things like that. And so I was like, well, this is what I want to do. So I changed my major to health and exercise science at Colorado State and just kind of started trying to get internships and things like that. That took me to the University of Denver. That was kind of my first one there. And I got to work with women's basketball, soccer, a bunch of different teams. And through that process was kind of figuring out, okay, where do I want to go to grad school? Because when you identify that this is your career, you typically need a master's degree.
Okay.
So I always wanted to go to the University of Kansas. My parents are from Kansas. I have a bunch of family out there. So I was like, that's where I'm going to grad school. And applied, got in. And so my wife and I, we got married and we moved out to Kansas, and I got my master's in exercise physiology out there. Now, typically you'd go to a school that provides like a graduate assistantship. And I thought I had one lined up, and then the coach I was going to be working under left for another university. So I had to really like kind of get creative on where could I just volunteer and learn how to coach. And I ended up at a place called Mid-America Nazarene, which in college you kind of have two different types of governing bodies. You have the NCAA, which is what most people are familiar with, and then you have the NAIA, which is a different classification that it's smaller schools, but they can give athletic scholarships. And so that's what Mid-America, or we called it MNU, was. And so honestly, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because I got a chance to coach a ridiculous amount of sports. They gave me men's basketball right out of the gate. I trained football over the summer, and really got to make a lot of mistakes that benefit me to this day today without like the ramifications of those mistakes, you know. So I really got to learn and sharpen my sword as a coach there. And then, I went to Oral Roberts. I was there for about 5 years, and the individual that had hired me there came to Boise State, and an opportunity came up here, and got here in 2018 and been here since.
Great. I appreciate the story there. So with all this experience, you've been in athletics for a long time, and coaching for quite a while, and part of this conversation that's going on with boys and men now, right, is ways to engage them in experiences that can show them how to be a man, how to build skills, right, in life, as well as to kind of be around other men. It can show them to what it looks like to be a man. And part of that conversation is around sports, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, from somebody who's, spent a lifetime in sports, like how you've seen both, I guess, like as a coach, but it could also be like as an athlete as well, how you've seen sports be a positive experience for guys.
Yeah, and I think sports can definitely be a positive experience, and I've been fortunate enough to have positive experiences as an athlete and as a coach. Sadly, the other side of that coin is they can be very negative experience. And those lessons are powerful too, because you see the good and the bad. And sport is such a unique arena in the sense that there's behaviors that are tolerated in sport that are nowhere else would they be acceptable. How you speak to other people, the sometimes when athletes just lose their cool and lash out, like.
Or you think of like a coach that you see pictures of, like a coach
screaming,
yelling at a player, and you're like, well, that's accepted in sport. But
imagine if your manager did that, or your supervisor. Like, you can't do that. There's policies there. Now again, there's so much adrenaline and things like that, not to excuse the behavior, but I think we've been conditioned to think that that's okay. And I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of good coaches that also see those instances and like, no, that's not the best way to do it. And through that, I've been with coaches that are very intentional about teaching life lessons through sport. Now, college is so great because for a lot of our kids, this will be it. And then, and I know the NCAA uses this phrase, but you're going to go pro in something else. So how can we develop you as a professional while you're playing sport, but then the lessons that are learned are going to apply to whatever you do? And I don't know, I think that's just always through readings, through the people I talk with or I've come into contact with over life. When they've emulated those kind of things, I've gravitated towards them. And I've just always kind of felt a responsibility even though I'm in the performance realm, I'm not dictating playing time or scholarship money or anything like that. I'm helping the physical development of our student athletes. But we also know that it's multifaceted. Like if your your emotional health, your mental health, your social health, if those things are out of whack, well, then your physical performance isn't going to be very good either.
Yeah.
So I've always tried to maybe have a proactive approach to like, how can I also tap into those things to make your physical experience great, but also educate you on the things that will apply to life.
What I'm thinking is that typical? Do you think like your typical performance coach is thinking like that kind of holistic approach of like, I want to help you perform, at the top of your level, physically, but also if I can help you emotionally, etc., then that also those are all connected, right? Is that, I hear you talk about that, right? But are other performance coaches like also likely to think through that frame?
Yeah, I can't speak to everybody. I would say typically not, and definitely not, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I do think that trend is starting to become more common. But and I've never met these individuals, but when you read like stories on Phil Jackson and how he would coach, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and the elite of the elite, it wasn't always about the X's and O's. It was about the mindset and relationships and how do you treat your teammates. And then you look at a guy like Greg Popovich. So most of my work, I work with our men's basketball program here. So I read a lot about basketball coaches. Same type of thing. He's a tough coach, but he's tough because he's created the relationship aspect with his players. And then, you try to be observant too to like the coaches you're working with now. And I think even Coach Leon Rice here at Boise State, he is big on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so my job is also to support his culture and his program, and you take bits and pieces and you start to see that there's more to this than just weight on a barbell or how fast their sprint time is. Like we're working with human beings, and you probably know better than anybody that human beings are incredibly complex. They have histories, they have biases, they have all these things that they've gone through. And, college is, for some of them, kind of their first exposure to different ways of thinking or different training methods. And I don't know, I've just always felt like there's a responsibility for that. And some of it too, I read a lot of books on like Stoicism, and you hear some of those leaders and, Marcus Aurelius and the ancient Stoic principles. And I've always just kind of gravitated towards those things and try to emulate them in my coaching practice.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I'm kind of curious about that is like, I wonder about guys coming in with that EQ type of mindset, and if that's something that you're really trying to help them build, develop in order to make and I know you're trying to not just like help them just be better athletes. You want them to be better people, right? Be better men. But like, is that something that you see with guys that come in that they tend to maybe struggle with a little bit more or need some more development in? Or do you see a lot of these guys like they're coming in with pretty good like EQ, etc.?
It's a wide range.
Okay.
And so much of it is family history, family dynamics, their backgrounds. I mean, we have some guys, like if we're looking at men's basketball in particular, we have some that very high EQs, and then we have some that not at all.
Yeah.
And now, especially in college, because what we have is this transfer portal, so people can really kind of come and go on a year-to-year basis. That changes the dynamics greatly. And so, it really just depends on the individual in particular. I will say, though, that I've seen a trend where maybe that's starting to go in a positive direction of better EQ at younger ages, just because of the accessibility of information like what we're talking about now. The internet, you have young players and young student athletes that are listening to messages from professionals, and they're taking that stuff serious about how to be a good teammate, how to treat people with respect. And I think there's this youth is kind of craving those things.
Yeah, that's kind of a thought that I had in the back of my mind is like, have you seen like trending or kind of shifting what that looks like? And that's interesting that maybe it's like the landscape shifting a little bit.
Yeah, and I can't say for certain, but I mean, even some of our young freshmen, that's just kind of the way they act, and there's some positive trends there. Yeah.
So one of the things that you I think you kind of hinted at it or talked a little bit about it and maybe come back to, but you were talking about where there's like I don't know what you want to use it. Maybe you have a is it still there?
Yeah, the wasp is okay though. It hasn't moved.
All right. The dark side of sport, or at least just some of the struggles with sports, and I'm the frame I'm thinking of here specifically is with men, but perhaps it's even broader than that. But just where the community of sport or the environment or the culture of sport can result in challenges for men as far as like the norms of what it looks like for guys, or what it kind of can shift them into. I don't know. I'm curious to hear you speak on that, of like what can be some of the issues or challenges around sport and the culture of masculinity in sport.
Yeah, I think the one that first comes to mind is, especially when you look at a game like football, that's the sport I played. It's physical. It's aggressive, and so because of that, there's this dynamic of like not showing your emotions or not being vocal when something hurts or when you're struggling or when you're having a problem. And when you hear and the phrase you hear a lot is be a man, toughen it out, walk it off, rub dirt on it, whatever. Yeah. And so that does become from like physical injuries sustained in football, but that also starts to bleed into maybe if you're having issues off the field, tough it out. As a man, we don't talk about it. And that depends on, again, your experiences with coaches. I've had coaches that definitely felt that way, and then I also had coaches that had open door policies, and it's like, if you need anything, come talk to me. And I also, I had a great father that also felt that way, and I could come to him with problems and issues, and so I was lucky there. But I think with sport, at times we create that element of like toughen it out, keep your mouth shut, nose to the grindstone. And if you do that long enough, depending on what your support system is or your recovery strategies, that can really create some problems. And when we talk about shift of dynamics, it's great. Like the NBA has the NBA Cares. Kevin Love is an example of an individual that's been very vocal about mental health and getting things off your chest. And then from a personal standpoint though too, when I was in college, I had a massive kind of mental health crisis where my anxiety, depression like skyrocketed. And I really had to take a step back and figure out, why was I going through what I was going through? And then how can I feel better? I didn't feel good. And so for me, speaking with a counselor was huge. Yeah. There was also some church groups that I would talk with, and that was some small group kind of stuff. Yeah. And just kind of going through those experiences, I recognized, and then now seeing what I can see in sport, and when people don't have that outlet, that they need it. And it can be very rewarding and therapeutic and healing too.
So in your personal experience, do I hear you saying that you can kind of recognize, like you can see in some of these guys, like that they've been, whatever, you're bottling it up or kind of holding it in, and like that these guys need some kind of outlet or support? Is that some of what I hear you saying here?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. And I think like for me, when I was really struggling, you feel like no matter whatever the issue is, for me it was like a period of transition. I was able to identify like my life transitions were about to change. Yeah. I was going to get married. I was going to finish school. I was going to start grad school. Like that's a lot of stuff, all positive, but stress and negative. I mean, stress is stress. Yeah. And, I maybe didn't have the best outlets on how to figure that out. But through that, I started to, recognize like, okay, well, going through that, I felt incredibly alone. Then when I started talking with people, I realized I'm not alone here. There's a ton of people that have these same feelings and emotions and struggles. And just being able to like hear that from another individual brought me so much relief. And so in my experience, when guys are able to, and I do think from a gender kind of standpoint, having a conversation with another male, because males will go through some similar emotions, that being able to bounce that off one another, you really can find some peace in what you're going through because you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that sense of like kind of universality, right? Of like there are other people that are struggling with this. And I think I hear you saying too around like you said transitions, like important transitions, and I imagine, you're able to identify those, right, with your athletes, right? Whether it's transitions around athlete to non-athlete, or from whether it's athlete to graduate school, right? You're going on to do something like a GA-ship or something, become a coach, or moving into career, and so kind of like get ahead of some of those transitions a little bit.
And when I was a younger coach, I mean, at some of the schools I've been at, if I would have done what I did here, we wouldn't be having this conversation now.
Yeah.
In terms of like making kids run for stuff, or making them, we'd call it push plates, where you push a plate on the ground and it's incredibly hard and somewhat embarrassing. But like, I thought that type of thing taught a lesson. And it doesn't. It just makes them mad. And now some kids are kind of like, okay, well, I ain't going to be late again. But I feel like over time, and again, you recognize these periods of transitions, and especially for an 18 or 17-year-old coming to college, that can be incredibly overwhelming.
Right.
So I've really tried to just create more patience and gratitude, and understanding and empathy that this is a challenge. And especially being a student athlete is even harder too than just a regular student. Just recognizing that those transitions, like, people need some grace and support during those times.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think sometimes whether it's faculty, and I think as faculty members, we forget that or lose track of that, of just how challenging it can be to transition to college, and then just how stressful it can be to be just a student, not even necessarily a student athlete, but just a student, right? And so that empathy for like their experience and the challenges around those and what that transition looks like. I think sometimes faculty can just be like, well, here's the expectations, like, get it done, right? Like,
coaches also can do that. Yeah.
Also, like, that they're dealing with a lot, and that something like a transition, can be so stressful. I think the farther down the road we get, we just like lose track of, oh yeah, when we were there, it was really hard too.
Well, and then this could be a separate discussion too, but then throw in social media and how everybody's overstimulated. Like, and I'll age myself. I'm 35. I graduated high school in 2007. That's right around the time when Facebook was kind of starting to take off. And I'm not lying here. I had Facebook for like 1 year, and I thought it was the dumbest thing ever, because it's like, if I want to go see what my friends are doing, I'll call them up. I'm just a little old-fashioned there.
Yeah.
Don't need to see it on the internet. And so I deactivated that, and even to this day, all I have is Twitter for the news and LinkedIn, which, again, makes me seem like an old man. But I feel bad for these kids now because of all these other apps and all the other pressures and all the other comparisons. Like, add that to the transition period. And that can be really hard to navigate.
Yeah. Well, let me transition us then, kind of related to that a little bit. So you and I we were connected a little bit because our daughters are in the same daycare, and then we were connected again around kind of men's health and what's going on with men on campus. But you were telling me a story about like during COVID, like what was going on with you and some of your thinking that you were doing, and around life in general, and like your career. And then you were also just thinking about like the ways that you wanted to support your athletes and what that looked like. And this, I think around this time, was around the genesis of your group Get Reps, and the reasons you wanted to get reps. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit of like kind of why you said, I want to do this for these athletes and for these reasons, and maybe you could tell that story a little bit of how you got there.
Yeah. COVID. Wow.
Right? Do I remember right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And yep. COVID is a unique one for me because maybe unlike some people, I'm grateful for it because it forced me to be at home and to pause and to reflect. And at the time, like I have a wife and I have a daughter, and they're the two most important things to me, but I wasn't really always living that way. I was incredibly invested in my career. It was and I was trying to be promoted at the time a little bit, and so it was like, all right, my wife, you handle everything else. I'm going to take care of this. And COVID forced a pause there, and I got more time with both of them that, I mean, in all honesty, I would do it again in a heartbeat because it was awesome. And it really forced me to reflect on like, what do I want out of my life and really what's important. And then from a job standpoint, COVID really made us reanalyze like, well, how much strength work do we really need to be doing? How much training do we really need to be doing? You don't need that much. We can still compete even though we're not in the gym, hours and hours out of the day because we had a lot of restrictions at that time.
Yeah. That's kind of scary for your job.
Yeah, it was a little bit. Yeah. But then that's where it's also like, okay, we'll get creative. How can we figure it out? Yeah. Then there was the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of that stuff kind of happened too socially. And within Boise State, we had some different subcommittees that were slowly being created on like different student outreach programs and things like that, and gender equity and LGBTQ, and so a lot of positive things. But one of them, I was in a meeting with a couple of our women administrators, and we were talking about ways to support women's sports because I've also coached a lot of women's teams here. And I don't know, I've always just had this feeling that like anything in life, the individual can take some ownership of it, right? Now that's not always true, but like if you want to improve your circumstances or you want to make a change, you need to look within. And that thought came up during this meeting. It's like, well, if we want to support women's sports, like we need strong men to do that. We need good men to help do that too. And so that through those kind of conversations, I was like, we need to start a men's group. We need to have a group, and again, that doesn't mean not only men can come, but a group where young men can have a platform and a room where we can talk about the things that we're dealing with. And again, as I start kind of getting this group started, you start doing the research and you're like, wow, this is actually a group that's really struggling, right? Especially in the state of Idaho.
Yeah.
And I know you and I, we've read a lot of similar books, and you start reading there's a gentleman by the name of Richard Reeves and some of his work, and I think you sent me maybe that article that he wrote about Redshirt the Boys, right, and just some really interesting stuff. And it's like, okay, there is a connection here. There's a calling for this, and there's kind of a need for it. And so myself, Jeff Matsushita, and then EJ Leitzinger. Jeff works in our Gender Equity Center here, and then EJ is one of our mental health professionals in athletics. We kind of co-created, and then obviously with your support too, Get Reps. And we named it that because, like anything, you got to get repetitions in it, whether it be having difficult conversations, talking about your emotions, public speaking, challenging your comfort zone. You got to get a repetition in it. And so we named it that, and this is year 3 of it.
Yeah, so getting reps and things that are, like not just getting reps in the weight room, but getting reps in some of these other things. And I think when I've heard you talk a little bit about this, trying to have conversations around too, like what does it mean to be a healthy man? What does it mean to get out of your comfort zone? What are things like emotions, right? And what does it look like? And so things that aren't maybe typical to like your typical performance conversation.
Yeah. Well, and one too, that's always like a weird topic to bring up, but like pornography. Like, and I recognize for young men, that's probably not a conversation you want to have with your head sport coach, but maybe you could open up about that with another, coach that's not going to necessarily dictate playing time.
Yeah.
But you're lying to yourself. I mean, the statistics are out there on how much that's being used by the youth, and those numbers skyrocket. And then you see the ramifications of that, or even, mild drug usage or alcohol abuse. I mean, we work on a college campus. We know alcohol can be rampant. And just having open conversations with that. And I think, as educators and practitioners, like, we owe it to these young people to at least impart knowledge of the things that we're studying to maybe help them make better decisions for their lives.
Yeah, those are think of some of the most interesting, engaging conversations, were around social media. So I was thinking about social media, around pornography, a conversation around values that we had, this semester in particular, that was really, I think, thought-provoking and interesting for these guys. And then it was just really, as an old guy myself, I'm 45, really interesting for me to hear their experiences that are just different than my own, right? As somebody who's not a digital native, I grew up mostly before the internet was invented, and before Facebook and phones and things like that. And so been really fascinating for me, but also really great, I think, to see these skills, right, that they're experiencing in this community setting. And so, just been really great to be a part of that and see that. And I don't know, from your experience, anybody else kind of doing things like this, like other people working in athletic performance? I mean, you kind of have your finger on the pulse a little bit on other people, at least like in basketball maybe, or other people at D1 kind of schools. Other people doing this kind of stuff with guys?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I had a good conversation with a colleague up at Gonzaga. His name's Mike Nielsen.
Okay.
He's the performance coach for the women's basketball team, but he played basketball at Gonzaga. And him and I actually had a conversation kind of about this too.
Yeah.
He does a little bit of work with his women's team. Probably not, and that's unique because he's a male, female athletes, but they'll have conversations about social media usage and maybe like, how to navigate periods of transition or struggle. I don't know if they get into the same type of dialogue that maybe we get to with our group just because it's the same gender. But I at least know he's doing some things that are just outside of performance.
Yeah.
I think there's some other coaches out there that definitely have the mindset of having these types of conversations, but I don't know if they're necessarily organizing it in the same way. I mean, I think for me too, it's just about a proactive way to maybe help.
Yeah.
I've always lived in that mindset of like action. Like there's so much theory out there, there's so much discussion, but it's like none of it matters if we don't put it into practice. And so this was just our way of like, can we make a small impact within our, Boise State athletic community?
Yeah, here in our community. Well, let me ask you this. I'm asking the personal question.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciate it. You've really shared a lot today, and I think it's been really helpful to kind of bridge the personal and professional. I can share, like, connect with you in the sense that we're both girl dads, right? So in fact, at my house, so it's my wife, 2 daughters, so my oldest is 12, youngest is 6. Our dog's a girl.
Yep.
You'll have a puppy.
Mine is a boy.
Boy, okay, so you're not totally outnumbered.
So it's kind of 2 versus 2. However, he loves the girls more.
Okay.
So I'm really outnumbered.
The dog does love me the most.
Okay, well,
so
that's good.
I at least have that on my side.
Yeah.
Where the kids really want the dog to love them more, but like the dog at least does love me.
That's awesome.
But I'm the only guy, right?
Yeah.
So that's been it's been a really powerful experience for me. In particular, it's been powerful for me to have daughters. it was different for me than being a husband, right? So I think being a husband, like just being married for 10 years was certainly a journey of being much more empathic of women's experiences. But I think for me, having daughters was a whole other level of just like
Yes.
what it's like to grow up in a world as a girl becoming a woman, and then also, you know, thinking about their experiences, right? And I think I've heard you talk a little bit about this, and just kind of curious to, you know, if you're open to it, hear about how that has impacted you, you know, to have a daughter and also being engaged in all this work with young men, and how those maybe are connected a little bit for you.
Yeah, they're definitely connected. With being a girl dad, which again, if I ever had any more children, I would want another girl. I mean, I love being a girl dad. She's changed how I operate, how I think. You know, I don't know how many times my wife has gotten on me about, you can't talk to her like you do one of your student athletes. So you definitely, there's some EQ right there too, totally. Right? Changing your tone and projection. And
you're like pretty like direct, you're pretty like loud tone,
right?
Kind of like
right. And even when I'm celebrating her, it's like probably moments of like, am I in trouble? Yeah. No, I'm excited for you.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, I think I want to live in a world where hopefully whoever my wife or my daughter chooses to love, or, you know, I want, if that's a man, I want it to be a good man, and I want to have a chance to, and I'm kind of going all over the map, but like create a community and hopefully a world where there's good men and there's good women, and we support one another, and our strengths and our weaknesses balance one another. And, you know, it's an environment where both sexes can thrive.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to it's on the individual to make a change or to make an impact. And so, you know, I want those, also the lessons I learned from these young men, that I can bring back to my family too. And that can be an educational opportunity. I think that's kind of how I look at that too, that it's, all this stuff is connected, right? And that's what makes life so unique and special. And by maybe some of the work that we're doing and what we're learning are those things that I can expose my daughter to, and that she also can recognize, like, this is healthy relationship behavior, this is not. How can I advocate for myself? How can I, you know, do things like that?
Love it. I think that's a great place to almost wrap up. So you're talking about you said like you like to read, and I know that you're reading a lot of stuff and you're into stuff, like, and so for anybody who's kind of interested in learning about some of the things that are interested in you, whether it's about boys and men, athletes, performance, and what's a thing or two, like stuff that you're interested in now, or stuff that's really impacted you that maybe you'd encourage people to look into?
We mentioned him a little bit earlier, but Richard Reeves, his book of Boys and Men, I think it's really just a great parenting book too. I mean, it is kind of geared towards young men and boys, but there are some things in that too that I think would apply even if you have daughters. And even if you're not a parent, there's some really interesting information in there. So like that's a really great one. Ryan Holiday, I mean, he's a current author. He's really kind of modernized Stoicism and Stoic thinking. Any and all of his books I would recommend. I mean, there's a lot. The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, Discipline is Destiny. There's a lot of great reads that he has out. You know, one writer that I also really like to put a plug in, and I want to meet him someday, his name is Wright Thompson. He writes for ESPN. He's got this this really kind of deep, raspy Southern voice, and sounds like he just took a shot of bourbon. And he is a big bourbon guy, but he wrote a book titled The Cost of These Dreams, and whether you like sports or not, it's all sports stories, but it's like stories of like Tiger Woods' life and Paul Bear Bryant. And the title kind of mentions like the cost of these dreams. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice to have it all? That's a great parenting book too. So I try to kind of those things. I mean, a lot of, self-development type books, but things, but within that, like, how can it impact a community?
Great. That's it sounds like it's a great mix of books, stuff that people can check out, and it's been great talking today.
Yeah, thanks,
Even
Matt.
after talking to you, I've learned a lot today, and just love the chance. And we didn't get attacked by the wasp.
We didn't. It looks cozy up there.
Okay.
So you did a good job.
Okay. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Matt.